What is up, guys? Wraec is here with a new video, and today we are going to talk about the top 3 cores for PvP and PvE that you should get on your account to do the best that you can do in Isle Heroes. First of all, didn't do a video like this for quite some time. There have been some changes. One of the major changes is that there is now a special recommendation. A special recommendation, what do I mean by that? Well, it is a core that you should get outside of those top 3 for PvP and PvE, a core that you should always get before going for any of those. And that is the above standing recommendation that I want to give you guys right now. The top core for everything that you should get is the core for your damage dealer. The core for your main damage dealer, if it's DTV, if it's LFA or SSM, doesn't matter. The core for your damage dealer unlocks Destiny for you. It is one of the major parts to have the Noble core to unlock Destiny. You can see it right there. It says equip the Noble core of Origin. You will need that to get Destiny transition on your heroes, so make sure you get this core. For DTV, for LFA, whoever your damage dealer is, get that first, and then you can go for any of the other cores we are going to mention here in a second. So let's start off with the top 3 for PvP. To be fair, we are starting from place 3 now. There are only 2 cores really used in endgame PvP at the moment. It is quite the stale meta in that sense. There isn't really too much. There are really too many different choices there. Still, I came up with one core that is the 3rd strongest in my opinion, and that core is DGN's core. What does DGN's core do? Well, DGN's core debuffs your enemies, buffs your own heroes. And the way this works is at the beginning or at the battle or at the end of the round, there is a 100% chance to inflict one random effect on all enemies, and there is another effect that is inflicted on top of all of the other effects on the enemy with the highest speed. So all enemies get one debuff, and the enemy with the highest speed gets an additional one out of those 3. So reduces control immunity by 10% for 2 rounds, reduces speed by 30, reduces energy by 20. And then there is basically the same for your team, but with buffs. So all of your heroes get one buff, and the ally with the highest attack, this time not speed, gets an extra buff. And then we have increased holy damage by 20%, control immunity offset by 5%, crit damage by 30%. All of those, of course, get buffed and get higher numbers when we go to Collaboration 8. The most important thing here for PvP are really the debuffs. Well, we take the extra damage, of course, but the debuffs are fairly interesting. If you are on par with the speed of your enemy, while reducing the enemy's speed, potentially duplicating this debuff with DGN can give you an advantage, especially in a CC situation. If he's slower than you, you might just CC his whole team before he can even attack. Next thing, reduces energy by 20. Well, what does that mean? What is the advantage? You have to consider the start of a battle. Basically, you have 50 energy, and then you can equip an energy artifact which brings you to 100 energy, so just enough to actually do an active skill. If your energy is now reduced by DGN by 20, well, your hero won't even do an active skill. He just has 80 energy, so he will do a basic skill. And that can be very life-saving, actually. If there is a huge burst team, for example, with the Star Swordsman Mock when he wants to burst you down and uses, let's say, melodic strings, and you reduce the energy, you will just be hit by a basic, which won't burst at all. So that can be a huge advantage for you to just reduce the energy of the enemy at the beginning of the battle to deny him his initial active skills. So keep that in mind. That is my place 3. Let's hop to place 2. And place 2 is one of the most meta cores already. Well, obviously it is. And I would say it's like 30-40% that use him at the moment, and it's the HHA core. Why is the HHA core so dangerous? Well, what does it do? It taunts 2 enemies at the beginning of the fight, and those 2 enemies are the enemies with the highest attack. They get taunted. What does taunt mean if you don't know? Taunt means if your hero is taunted, it will only attack the hero that taunted it. And so active skills that hit the entire enemy team will no longer do that. They will only hit the enemy that taunted the hero, and that can be devastating for to a lot of heroes. For example, TBB. If TBB usually attacks the entire enemy team and then CCs the heroes, she will no longer do it. She will just attack Hyperspace Hunter Islamark with no chance to CC the entire enemy team at all. And that really destroys some teams already that just put all of their strategy into bursting the enemy down with a huge TBB. You have to counter that, and there's not really a really good way to counter that if you run TBB. You want to run energy, so you can't really run a candy cane. The only thing that you can really do, and that is something that I have done, is get taunt immunity. Beautiful roll, by the way. Taunt immunity, that will of course counter HHA, but that is also a huge investment. You can only get that on S tier heroes. So for most of the players that won't be an option, which makes this core super dangerous, especially if you don't want to go into depth 10 or something in the most latest Void Horde. Then this core, the HHA core, will be absolutely devastating. And this was just one part of the effect, really. There is also the other feature of it. Reduces the enemy's precision. Well, what does that mean? That is synergy with HHA, because HHA gains buffs and provides shields when heroes block. So if the enemy has less precision, your chance to block is higher, which helps your HHA perform well. So if this core is active, HHA will help your team more. And then every 6 successful blocks, we also have a chance to taunt to enemies again. And then we also reduce their crit by 50% and holy damage by 15%, and all enemies' precision again by 30%, which also, nice synergy by the way at this point, with DGN. If you can spread that crit reduction or that holy damage reduction, well, that will certainly hurt your enemy. At Core Liberation 8, by the way, 80% crit reduction. So basically no more crit for your enemy and 55% precision. With some DGN debuff spreads, your enemy will have 0 precision left pretty fast. So, very great core, very insane, and definitely a very well worth place too, and one of the cores that I think we'll see in the meta quite a bit still, because it's quite hard to counter. You want to have your TBB at a very high attack, but if you do that, you run into HHA. And with Destiny Transition Tenants, I think it's become a bit more difficult to have your damage dealing heroes somewhere at a third highest attack or something. So definitely one of the best cores in the game. Next one. And here we have the place 1, and that is of course the one that everybody expected. I think it's TBB core, obviously. TBB core, why is it so good? Well, TBB is still one of the strongest heroes in PvP, the most used I think currently. And the TBB core enhances her abilities. The way this works is every time she releases Scarlet Therapy or triggers Scarlet Therapy to her passive skill, we deal some damage to all Bloodbinding Twined enemies and reduce their energy, which is huge. 50% chance to reduce it by 10 more. This is huge because we already have that in her skill tree at the end of each round to reduce it, but this gives her like almost a carry effect where we wipe the energy off the enemies, and even if they are then freed by PDE, from the CC, they are just left with no energy. So we get a very huge energy drain from that, limiting the damage enemies can inflict to our team, which is very nice. And the last part is deals 150% attack damage to the rest of the enemies with a 50% chance to Bloodbinding Twine them for 2 rounds. So the heroes that formerly escaped our active skill, for example, will then be twined because the core will give us another chance. And there can even be the situation where we do an active skill, twine a lot of enemies, thereby recoup a lot of energy, trigger our active skill again through Superfluous Oblation, her passive skill, and then trigger the core again, which is a super weird situation, but that gives you like another layer of effects added to your active skill. And TBB, not PDE, TBB is the hero that does the most with her active skills probably in the game by triggering it through herself and through a passive skill as well, which she had never seen before. So having a core add on to that even more is definitely huge, and definitely this is one of the cores that you will see the most in PvP, and one of the reasons people bought a ton of S tiers in search of twine immunity. So again, one of those CC cores that you really want to counter. If you can have 2 or 3 heroes with twine immunity on your team, that will make it way harder. Other ways that I saw were even candy canes that were used to prevent this core and the 0 TBB even from twining your heroes. So those ways can work, but it is quite annoying. And quite annoying is always, well, it's a good grade for a core like this. So number 1 core, definitely TBB for PvP. To recap that, place 3 DGN, place 2 HHA, and place 1 TBB. Now for PvE. And in PvE, for the place 3, I thought long and hard. There were certainly contenders that I thought about. I thought about MFF, but her damage buff just pales in comparison to another core. I thought about Starving Jara, which we had before, but you never use Starving Jara core currently in PvE. If you can CC, well, obviously use TBB core. Another worthwhile mention for this is Ferric Vesa core. If you are hit down, if you have trouble surviving, if your heroes get CC'd, she can clean off that CC. That is certainly a good ability. I decided in a different route. I decided for another damage buff hero, and for a hero that also helps with debuffs and is often in your team in Void Campaign or in other PvE situations for now, and that hero is DGN. We see her again on place 3, also in PvE. I still think that those debuffs are pretty great if we see the Collaboration 8 variant. The debuffs, still speed reduction, not that impactful. Reducing control immunity can always help. Reducing energy is very nice. And just getting hit less by active skills, especially in situations where you can't use CC. Because that is the situation in Void Campaign, for example, that you have to keep in mind. We have a situation where we either use CC and that will clear it, or situations where CC doesn't work. And only in situations where CC doesn't work, you will use a core like DGN core. And then it can be interesting to have other means of buffs, to get like 40% holy damage, to get crit damage, to have DGN on the team to just reduce the energy of the enemies a little bit, because we don't have too many ways of actually doing that. So this is definitely something of value in this core, limiting the damage that your enemies can do, and you can combine that with a few other things. DGN spreads debuffs, so maybe put some attack reductions there, build a little bit of a debuff team, and use that to limit the damage heroes in Void Campaign can inflict on your team. If you have rounds, fights that last multiple rounds, that is especially true. So place 3, again, DGN with the contenders that we mentioned at Ferric Vesa, MFF, Starving Jara. Place 2 now, TBB. TBB is basically the hero and the core that clears most of your campaign stages nowadays. It will clear everything that doesn't include Geggy, SQH, Sherlock. Well, still clear most Sherlock stages. You can use her against that. It will just be a bit more difficult. And Gustin. Those are the stages that she can't clear. Everything else just falls to her, and that will give her a pretty worthwhile place 2 again for the core that we just explained. The second layer of Bloodbinding Twine in PvE, though, special situation. The thing is, it is harder to see those CC those PvE enemies. They have higher control immunity than your average PvP pleb, and so that will help you again CC difficult heroes like Tara. On top of that, you should of course stack Star Spawns with control immunity offset. If you saw my Star Spawn meta guide, I already mentioned that. But this core is another layer and another chance to CC, and is certainly the one that you would want to have an easy time clearing most of the Void Campaign stages in the game, and basically all of Void Vortex and a few other game mods. So definitely one of the best. Place 2. Place 1, Old Core. Old Core, one of the cores that we have used for campaign for ages, honestly. Star Alchemist Holmes Young, still great in my opinion. Again, for the situations where you can't use TBB. You will always use TBB core if you can use TBB. But this core will give you a ton of buffs. We check out the Collaboration 8. We can say every time our heroes basically takes an active or basic skill, we consume a bottle, okay. But we gain 16% attack, 16% armor. You can combine that with DGN. I'm not exactly sure. I think I saw her copy the buffs. Should be. But the buff alone on your main hero, if you position him correctly, and you get 6 hits in one round. Just imagine it, 6 hits in one round, and you have a 96% attack buff on that hero. Nearly doubling the attack this guy has. And then you have some extra stuff in there. The perceptual disorder is sometimes interesting. If some of your heroes die, especially in a Gustin situation, we had those Gustin fights on 662. If you had your heroes die there, sometimes it would just perceptual disorder the armorers in that on that wave, and that would give you such a big advantage because they wouldn't attack, they wouldn't have to deal with those shields, and it would free the way for you to deal extra damage. So perceptual disorder is one big point here, but also the attack buff obviously is insane. We can really use that. Didn't really get around to do something with the dot buff yet, but maybe we'll get a huge dot hero in the future, and it will be interesting again. But for now, attack buff and perceptual disorder, this will help you clear the difficult stages, the one that TBB can't clear, and for that reason it is my place 1 in PvE. So to summarize that again, place 3 is DGN, place 2 is TBB, and place 1 Star Alchemist Homesiang in PvE. For those really difficult stages, I think getting a TBB core, getting a Star Alchemist Homesiang core is a good decision for that. So what are your favorite cores? Write me in the comments. One thing I'm still quite sad about is that they no longer do very good animations for those cores, like good animations. ATD core, for example, has very nice animations, but they no longer do that. It's quite sad. Write me in the comments which core you like the most, and make sure you're subscribed to the channel. We're still on our way to 10K, and with that, I wish you a great day. And see us in the next one.